Hello, testing, testing. Oop. Testing, testing. Hoping that everything works. So sorry, everyone, for the late start. But it looks like everything is working correctly, hopefully. We'll just give it a few seconds. All right, everything looks to be all good. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tales from a Wanderer. I am, of course, your host, Oliver Sanchez, professional wilderness guide and all-round outdoors enthusiast. Today, as I said last week, we will be heading back up into Canada to talk about some of the funny participants that I had on the trips that I led, and some of the people that I had that I had on my own trips up there. So the first story comes from trip once again in Minnesota that I was guiding, and this is the first session trip. So it's the first trip that I ever did, basically, if I remember correctly. It was basically the first trip that I had ever led, and we at the start of every trip, you get your people, basically, and, you get all your people and you form your group and you start, basically having fun with each other, right? Like, bonding, because you're gonna be stuck with each other for the next 3 weeks, so better get comfortable. And so we started making the group, and immediately me and my leader partner, we were just looking at this poor kid, and he's just, like, the clumsiest guy we know. Actually, it might have been second session. Yeah, I think it was second session, but he was just this really, really clumsy guy. Great kid, though, great kid. And so we got out on trail, and, we were a couple of days in. We were probably 8, 9 days in, and we just finished a portage, and we were kind of sitting on the other side, just kind of floating in canoes. I was the last one out. I had thrown all my gear into my canoe, and I was, like, making sure everything's strapped down and checking everything, and I pushed off, and immediately, the my leader partner, who had the kid at the time, just basically was like, this kid was like, "Oh, I forgot my paddle." "What? You forgot your what?" "Oh, I forgot my paddle on land. It's right there. I can see it." And I turn around, and the paddle is in fact right there. It is. And so I paddled back and I grabbed it, and basically, like, I paddled back and I grabbed it, and I was like, "Oh, I'll just paddle to him," right? And then, kind of as a practical joke, I was like, "Oh, no, just throw it into the water, like, haha, make him go swim for it," right? So we kind of, like, threw it in. We were way ahead of schedule, and I guess it ended up in the water, and so ended up in the water, and my leader partner at the time was like, "Oh, ha ha ha, like, it's a joke, like, you guess you have to go swimming for it." And this kid, without another hesitation, without even thinking about it, was like, "Okay," jumped right in. Jumped right in after it. No hesitation whatsoever, no second thought, nothing. Um, I was laughing so hard, like, I could barely breathe, because I was laughing so hard at this poor kid who had just jumped into the water and basically gone, "Ah, yes, basically, I must get this paddle back under any circumstances." So it was very funny, because kinda after that, as I'll tell this story, the events just got more ridiculous, and he was, by the end of it, he was just the most ridiculous kid, and we all it was so much fun to be on the trip with all the participants, but he's just so ridiculous in everything that he was doing. So, he jumped in, and we were all laughing, and he, swam back to the canoe. It's like, "Ah, guys, that's not very funny." Whatever, right? So he was laughing too, and we all got back in, and so we continued throughout the trip, and surprisingly, no more accidents happened within the next 3 days. and then we had to paddle quite a long lake. So it was like 20K lake paddle. So it like takes you some time, and we had a headwind, and so we were paddling this lake, and this kid was in the back with me, not in my canoe, but we're paddling side by side. We were talking, and he turns to me and he goes, "I need to go to the bathroom." And I was like, "You need to do what?" "I need to go to the bathroom." Right? And so in the canoe, as guys, you just kind of stand up and go, right? Like no big deal. And there was a little bit of wind, maybe a foot and a half waves, and he just kind of stood up, right? I was like, yeah, go, whatever. Like I was gonna keep pointing this way. Like, of course we won't look, like whatever, right? Kept pointing this way, and I was kind of relaxing, lying down in the canoe and talking to my partner, and we were just, chatting. And all of a sudden from behind I just hear splush, right? And the waves had rocked his canoe, and he'd fallen in again. I turned around, I was like, what was that? And he was swimming in the water again. And once again, I mean, I was laughing hysterically again, because he basically just, fallen in out of a canoe again, basically. And the leader in front turned around to me, and he's like, what happened? The whole group was laughing at that point. It was very funny because, like that happened, and then we kept paddling, and it started to get a little bit cold out. And so I had like my fleece on and like my rain jacket on at that point. It got a little bit cold, and we were still paddling this lake, and this kid was like, "Okay, I'm gonna try again." Right? Like I'm just gonna try again. So we're like, okay. Like we were all rafted together. Like we were all clipped together, right? From my previous stories, like we were all clipped together, and when no one was going anywhere, the waves weren't even that high. It was started to get dead flat. And he stood up again, and I was just chilling in the back, talking to the leader again, and all I hear is splush again. Again, he went into the water. That was the second time, and since it was cold out, he had all of his like dry. I guess like he had a fleece on, and he had his rain jacket on, and I was just like, "Oh, come on, man! Like, how is that possible?" That was the second time now. And so we were merciless to him. It was all, of course, in good fun, and like he was fine, and it wasn't that cold, but we were laughing so hard, so hard. And so we continue on the trip, and we get to day 15, no, 14, maybe 15, and we had just had a pretty hard day. We had helped the women's kind of cross section. So when we're out on these trips, there's usually another cross section from our base camp that also goes out, and that's usually women, or it's like a co-ed trip. So we had helped evac two of them. So two of them had to leave trail, unfortunately, and so that was a particularly hard day for us. And we were paddling again in basically storm conditions. It was 4-foot waves, cresting easily. I was exhausted. My leader partner was exhausted. We were all super tired, and all the participants were, and we were just like, we just want camp, right? Like we just want camp, and so in Minnesota, like camp's hard to find, and we were just paddling. I felt like we were paddling endlessly. So we were paddling and paddling and paddling, and eventually we kind of came. We could see a campsite. I was in sight of a campsite. And the same kid, right, stopped again. And he was like, "I need to go to the bathroom." And I was like, "Don't fall in. Like, you better not fall in, right? Because it's already been a hard day, and like, we're all feeling it. Like, don't fall in." So he had decided to try a new technique he had come up with, I guess. And he had leaned over the gunnel to go to the bathroom, basically. So he leaned over the gunnel, which meant that his partner was leaning over the opposite gunnel, basically, to counteract the boat, and so he wouldn't flip. 4-foot waves coming in. They turn sideways in it. He doesn't have the best balance. He's terrible at balancing. So he flips. I mean, he goes in, right? Splush, right? And I'm still paddling, right? Like I don't hear them. They were a couple meters behind me, so I was still paddling, and I knew that they could catch up. But like splush, and I hear it far off, and I thought it was the sound of the wave, so I just kept paddling, and then I hear again, and his partner went in because his partner was leaning on one side, and so when that weight went, his partner went in as well. So both of them, it was kind of like the icing on the cake of the whole trip, of the whole day. Hard day, long portage. We did 4K portage, evac, like tired, hot, hungry, right? Terrible weather. 2 kids are now in the water. Great. Awesome. Incredible. They had also managed to dunk a gunnel. So the boat is now got 3 inches of kind of headboard room. 3 inches. I don't know how they managed to dunk a gunnel as well. But like I turn the boat immediately, paddle back to them, and I'm like, stupid, right? Like, how'd you manage to do that? Grab the boat, clip onto them, basically. One of them gets in, the other gets in. Okay. But the minute they went in, right, my other leader, the other leader was 200 meters ahead of me, right? So I'm like, hey, I got 2 in the water, right? And he like kept paddling. I was like, I got 2 in the water, and he eventually stopped and turned around. And he's like, okay. I just saw him shaking his head, and our universal sign for okay is you usually kind of touch your head twice and then raise your hand, and so that's like a whitewater thing, and so he kind of made this signal at me, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, and I made the signal back, and so we were all okay at that point. But I'm bailing this boat, and I had emptied a water bottle. We had no water left, so we had filtered all the water, and we had no water left. So filtering and filtering and filtering. Finally, right? The day's over, right? Okay, this kid flipped. He can't do anything else, right? Nothing else will go wrong. We get into camp, right? We see a storm on the horizon. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. We've got a tarp. We'll set up the tarp. We start setting up the tarp. I say to this kid, because he wasn't helping on dinner, he wasn't on the chore rotation. I say to this kid, oh, hey, help me tie this. Can you just tie this here? Like, I'll hold it for you, right? Because the tarp's a little bit heavy when it was wet the night before, and so it was a little bit heavy, and so he's tying it off, right? And so I'm like, okay, that's good. And this is a lesson in always checking your work. I'm like, okay, that's good, right? We were making dinner, and the storm's getting closer and closer and closer, and I'm like, uh-oh, okay, here we go. Like, it's gonna be another wet night, basically, right? So we had made sure our tents all and everything, the tents are fine, right? So the storm rolls in, and we all take shelter under the tarp. What we didn't know is that the storm was way more powerful than we thought it would be. It was just rain coming in sideways, coming through the tarp, and then all of a sudden, the wind kicks up. And I was like, oh, I really hope the knots hold. The wind kicks up, and one of the corners just flies loose instantly, immediately loose. I'm like, oh, come on. And water was just gushing in. I mean, there was no point in staying under the tarp at one point, because it was just like, all right, I'm soaked now. Great. Awesome. So I was like, how'd that happen? Like, I was watching that, and I was like, oh, I had that kid tie that off. What was I thinking? So for the last few days of the trip, every time we set up the tarp, I was like, all right, don't touch it. Don't touch the tarp. But more than that, every time we were on the water and this kid needed to go to the bathroom, he just jumped in the water. Because he was like, I'm going to be in there anyway. I'm just going to jump in the water. So it was very funny. And like throughout the trip, we just had a very funny, like, running joke. Like, he's got to go again. Quick. Make sure you have your life jacket on, basically. Right. So it was just very funny. Between the whole trip, that kind of became our little inside joke. just this kid just being like crazy and nuts. But other than that, I mean, the trip was great. And so, like, even though mistakes were made, right? And people got wet and cold, like, I think that was some of our best times, right? Because people were just having fun and you don't have to worry about anything else and you just kind of kick back and relax in nature. So it was super, super fun. Even though we were merciless. So that is the first story. The second story that I have is more about my trips, as I was a participant and not guiding or leading or anything like that. But we had me and my canoe partner. We had been basically partners throughout all of our trips, even up to the bay, and so we basically started off. This is kind of a couple stories from kind of our first trips. And we started off together one day. I specifically remember it. And I mean, this was another running joke. And when you're out there, you just gotta have some fun. And so we were we were out there, and we were about to do our first rapid. And this was the first rapid I'd ever done. I mean, it was a C1, low flow, super easy. And at the time, I was quite light. I was a very light person. I only weighed like what 130 pounds, maybe, right? This was kind of my freshman, my middle school going into freshman year of high school, basically. But and he was a little bit heavier in back, so he was heavier than me. And I remember thinking to myself, "Won't I just get like ejected from the boat? Right? Like, won't this just happen?" And so whenever I see him now, because now me and him are, we rode together, and I got to see him a couple weekends ago. And so whenever I see him, I always bring this up. But we basically, it was, I mean, this created an everlasting friendship, I would say. So we start down this rapid, right? And there's one big wave train, right? It's like a 2-foot wave, easy, no problem, right? Me and him, little grade school kids, like we should we should be fine. And so I hit the rapid, but we weren't loaded with gear at all, basically. So I was in bow, and we weren't loaded with gear because it was just fun and we were gonna lap it. And so I hit it first, and since he was heavier, I was just like shot up basically, all the way up. And I lifted I remember just lifting out of my seat and tipping to my left. And we came back down on the other side of this wave, and I like wham, and I like the gunnel basically caught me just in my life jacket, surprisingly enough. I like landed on the gunnel and kind of went, ugh, all the air just deflated from me. And I remember I had the only thing that they teach you kind of when you first start going down rapids is hold on to your paddle, right? Like hold on to your paddle like it's your lifeline basically. So I was holding on to my paddle with one hand and trying to grab the gunnel with my other hand while like being dragged along, like drowning basically in this boat. But we got to the bottom, and the leader comes down, and he was this crazy leader. And you know, he was just he was like a wild man to us, like right? Like little kids. And he was just a crazy, crazy leader. But we kind of, we were like, okay, that was pretty funny. He was like, "I thought you guys would flip for sure." And this wide-eyed look in his eyes. I was like, Yeah, me too. I thought we were gone for sure. I thought we'd flip the whole canoe." It was very funny, and now I tease him about it all the time. But that kind of started off, and the leader realized, oh hey, they're pretty good, right? Together as a partner pair. So we kind of continued on as a partner pair. And later on in the trip, we had to, after our repro, we had to cross basically a lake called Grey Mud. And so it's like this primeval ooze, I guess you'd call it. Um, but it's got kind of a layer, it's got like a foot of water on top and then mud, but it's more like sediment and then water underneath and more mud basically. So it's like like disastrous to paddle in. Like it's terrible to paddle in. We were able to sail it, which was great. As from one of my first stories, I said sailing is great, and we had a stiff tailwind, so we put up our tarp and sailed pretty much across this kind of 3 kilometer lake. And we get to the other side, and we're close to shore, and we've unrafted, and I'm paddling in, and we get stuck. Right, we get stuck, and I'm just thinking, oh man, like we made it all this way, and like gray mud's this huge challenge, right? And so my friend in stern said to me, "Oh, just jump in." God, God, duh. Why didn't I think of that? That's genius. So I just jump in, right? Like not knowing, of course, that it's like up to my chest. So I jumped in and immediately I was here basically in it. So I kept hold of it. I was like, it's really deep. And we were only, 10 feet from shore maybe. And that was it. And I had one hand on it and I was like, it's really deep. And he's like, oh, it's a lot lighter now. I started paddling and paddled to shore. So he he paddled to shore, right? I was like, wait. So I let go, right? And he paddled to shore. I was like, oh come on. I swam to shore and he didn't get his boots dirty. And now of course, he's a leader as well. And so he's also done some crazy things and he didn't get his boots dirty and not a speck of mud on him. And I stepped out and I was just covered in mud after this portage. I was covered in mud. And it all started to dry on me. It was a hot day out. It started to dry on me. And I was like, why'd you leave me? He was like, well, the boat was lighter. I was like, well, yeah, of course it was. There wasn't a whole other human in there. So we had a fun back and forth, I guess, kind of riff, which was very strange. Very strange. But he just thought of this idea and he just thought, perfect. I shall throw him to the lions. But I had my revenge. I definitely had my revenge. Um, kind of later on, same trip, we had gotten, it was like finally last days of the trip, right? We had gotten to camp, us together again, because that's what we do. Us together again. And we had gotten to camp, but camp, the unloading zone was just like a shelf and just slid into the water. So we're all struggling to get up there, and I'm like clawing my way up. And my sternman, he just went, same buddy, and he just went, oh, I'm gonna throw my Pelican case. So a Pelican case, it's like a hard kind of plastic box. It holds, like, I take it out when I have it. I think I've described it a little bit before, but I take it out sometimes when I'm doing camera shoots, in the water, and I don't want things to get wet, basically. But I took it, and he was like, "I'm gonna throw it to you." I'm like, "What? You're gonna throw it to me? I'm gonna throw it to you." Right? Like it's waterproof. Like what? Okay, whatever. I'm gonna throw it to you. So he winds up and releases it. Right? It misses me by a wide margin, but I'm tracking the case, right? It lands in some bushes. I'm like, ah man, you missed. And I turn around and he's like kind of in free fall backwards off the edge of the canoe. And he just wham, like lands in the water, like with his back, and he's sprawled on his back. And I was like, yep, karma at its finest for, first of all, almost killing me in that rapid, then pushing me into gray mud. But in the end, we went on, and now me and him, of course, good friends. At first, maybe not so much. But we went on and crossed the bay together and had all these great adventures. But it was very funny at first because we had this very rocky, I guess, start to our adventuring, because both of us were like clueless, I guess you'd say. Clueless to what we had to do, and clueless to what we were doing, basically. But those were a couple stories about him, and he's great now. But it was very funny in the beginning for us. But now I want to share, like, Of course, as kids, we also did some dumb things as well. But we were on the bay. We were a little bit older. I was in my junior year. No, my senior year. My junior year. My junior year, high school. And we were getting into that. And we went up and we did the bay. So big trip, really important, kind of like the centerpiece and the goal of all your trips up to that point. And we were doing the bay and we had this new kid. So we had kind of named our group the lads up to that point. We were the lads, and there were 8 of us basically in this little group, and we were super close. We'd done 4 trips together now. But there was this new kid now that had added on. And at first we were like, do we like this kid? Do we not like this kid? And us being the lads and him being this new kid. And so we were on day 17. We were dropping off the Canadian Shield and getting close to the bay. And we were kind of like, finally, we were comfortable. Finally, all of us were comfortable with each other. And I mean, we had finally been through everything. 1 mile, which is very treacherous, very dangerous, and pink rock and slick rock, and kind of gone through all this stuff, and Mr. Bubble's Chasm of Death and portage around that, and kind of done all this stuff together. And then we we got to day 17 and we were like, it wasn't even something conscious, I think, that happened, but I turned to another one of the guys and I kind of made eye contact with him. I was like, yeah, it's time. I turned to another one, gave him a nod, and we were all kind of playing in this little water pool. So I was looking across and giving them nods and giving them nods. And so we slowly, ever so slowly, surrounded this kid, this poor kid. We're all chanting, right? Of course, being a younger self, not being the hopefully more mature person I am now. We're all started chanting, right? Getting louder and getting louder. And I remember, my sternman, same guy, he grabbed this kid. He was like, it was this whole initiation ceremony that I remember very, very, very well. And we started dunking him. And he raised him up and dunked him again and raised him up and dunked him again and raised him up. And we were having so much fun with this poor kid. Just throwing him. I don't think he'd even breathe at one point. Just throwing him around, and so finally we let him up and gave a cheer, and it was this big thing. It was very funny. But later on, when I joined the leaders and kind of got more of their stories, the assistant leader on that trip kind of came up to was telling this story, and I had one of the kids on another trip come up to me and he was like, "Are you one of the lads?" I'm like, "Well, yeah. Why?" And he's like, "Did you almost drown a kid?" Like, oh boy. Well, we might have almost drowned a kid. I mean, technically we didn't, but it was very funny that story kind of just continued through the generations of us initiating this poor kid in the waters. But I couldn't believe that he was telling that story to his poor participants, that he was even like reenacting it. So that was those were kind of two couple series of stories about, when you're a participant and you're just having fun, and it's not all about rugged conditions and being the best and portaging 4 kilometers with a 95-pound canoe on my back, right? It was just about having fun, having a laugh at each other. And I've done my fair share of not so very smart things, of leading people the wrong way and doing all that fun stuff. But those were kind of the stories I want to share today. It looks like, however, this will probably be the last show. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe. I think we've had some fun stories throughout the 11-ish weeks I have been here at school. But next semester, I will, of course, be back, hopefully with maybe even season 2 from Tales from a Wanderer, or even some new stories, some new podcasts. Who knows what will hold in the future? But if anything, I will always be around the radio studio. So if you're enjoying this, tune in next semester. So, as always, I've been Oliver Sanchez with Tales from a Wanderer.